Alright, today we're going to be talking about an incredibly engaging topic, identification numbers. Now, I am certain you can all barely contain yourselves. Y'all are just chomping at the bit to get a sniff of what it is that I've cooked, but please, allow me to elaborate. Now, to date, we have from a variety of sources 4 employee IDs for various characters: Sineto, Marcus, Greta, and Miss Masson. And from this, we can glean some minor details about how these characters and the general structure and organization of the Foundation is. So if we take a look at one of these ID cards, we will notice that there is a string of letters and numbers labeled identification number. But what exactly do these silly little numbers mean? As it so happens, quite a lot, actually. If we take Sineto's card here as an example, we see that her identification number is SF00000800110Y.
Just leave the number out next time.
But what does this tell us, and why have I spaced it out in such an oddly specific way? Well, as it turns out, each sequence gives a little bit of information about the personnel in question. And before we go any further, there's going to be a lot of numbers in this video, and I have seen how some of you react when 37 opens her mouth, so I'm going to do my best to make this as engaging as possible for all of you, alright? There we go. So we're going to go ahead and start with this cluster of 3 sequences in the middle of the ID number. I believe that this indicates the date at which the person was registered as an employee of St. Pavlov's in the format of year, month, and day. But why registration date? Why not birth date? At first glance, birth date does seem like a reasonable deduction. Sineto's date sequence is 00080110, which would correspond to 8 years post-storm, January 10th, right? And in this case, the month and day actually do line up with the completion date that is stated in her bio. However, we also know that Sineto, and everyone else for that matter, don't actually know when her true birth date is, right? She is orphaned as hell. The day that is listed on there is just the one in which she was taken in by the Foundation. It's not actually her birth date. Additionally, on closer inspection, the year itself doesn't actually make a ton of sense for her birth date. 8 years post-storm is relatively recent. It would correspond roughly to about the start of the main story, meaning that when we first see Sineto, she is likely to have become just a newly minted agent of St. Pavlov's, right? 1966 may have been her first real field mission as an official operative, and that's kind of implied by her interactions with Verton in Chapter 0. In that section, she seems less sure of herself, a little bit stiffer than you would normally expect, which would be a bit odd if she had been working with Verton for some time. So I think the implication there is that they haven't been working together. This is fairly new for Sineto. On top of that, we also get 2 additional personnel IDs. We have Marcus's and Miss Masson, neither of which line up with their listed completion date in their bios. Marcus is listed as the 12th of January, while Miss Masson's bio completion date is the 25th of November. However, the date sequences on their IDs imply October 23rd, 1912 and August 23rd, 1919, respectively, right? The dates don't match up. I would also like to point out that while Marcus doesn't actually have her ID card shown, the number in the top right of the personnel document does actually match that of the ID number on Greta's card, so from that we can kind of extrapolate Marcus's. And if you're looking and you can't find this particular document in-game, that's because it is not in-game. This is official Blue Block merchandise that I found on Twitter, courtesy of the Daily Greta Hoffman account, link in the description below. Credit where credit is due, right? And if we look at this document, Greta's document, we see that the date February 2nd, 1993 matches what the sequence on her ID card says, and this is listed as her start date. Now, admittedly, there is a bit of a conflict with another document that shows that that date instead is listed as date of birth. But if we think about it, that doesn't actually make a ton of sense, right? If she was actually born in 1993, then regardless of the storm, it would be chronologically impossible for her to be 38 years old currently. Since the original 1993, only 14 years have actually passed, right? 6 years to get to 1999, and then another 8 years on top of that spent reversing to all sorts of eras, right? 14 years in total. Given that and all of the previous evidence, I'm leaning more towards this being a typo for entry date rather than her intended birth date. But that's going to be about it for the dates. Now, as far as this starting 7th character sequence, I originally found it a bit difficult, admittedly. The SF as an affiliation code for St. Pavlov's Foundation made enough sense, but I couldn't quite figure out the following 5 digits. Initially, I had assumed that this was a unique identification number, right? Which then kind of left me a bit stumped on the final 2 characters of the ID, which is what I had originally assumed was the identifier. However, upon looking over this again, and with some helpful tips from the subreddit, I kind of noticed that Greta and Marcus actually have the same starting sequence, SF27600. This implies that this string is intended to be read as a single sequence, most likely pertaining both to affiliation as well as specifying exactly what section that particular person belongs to within that affiliation. And I mean, this makes sense, right? Marcus is Greta's apprentice. She was most likely registered at Greta's home branch after being picked up off the planet Isles. My assumption then is that Sineto's SF00000 would imply that her home base is the primary headquarters of the Foundation, and she most likely shares the starting sequence with Burton and Matilda if we ever wind up getting their cards. And this solidifies that the final two characters are indeed the unique identifier, right? And while this admittedly doesn't tell us a whole lot, as we don't actually know what they correspond to, if anything, they could just be entirely random. One thing that we can sort of derive from this is the number of anticipated staff for any given branch, as having only 2 identifying characters in the string allocated gives us a hard limit on the number of possible unique permutations, right? Which they would have to be unique, because if you're duplicating the sequence, then that kind of defeats the whole purpose of an identifier. So, assuming 10 digits 0 to 9 and 26 letters A to Z, the number of possible unique permutations in this specific arrangement of number followed by a letter is 260. Now, if we assume that the arrangement does not matter, though we don't actually have any evidence of that being the case, then the number jumps up to 520, right? Double the amount of possible outputs. It's also unlikely that the ID would be case sensitive, but if it is, then taking into account upper and lowercase letters, that gives us about 520 possible permutations with arrangement mattering and 1040 without. But with the evidence that we currently have, our most likely case is that a maximum of 260 employees at any given time are anticipated for each branch, which means that pre-storm, admittance into the Foundation was highly selective, right? 260 people to run a branch doesn't seem like a whole lot when you consider just the sheer scope of the Foundation's work, right? They are a multinational organization. That's 260 people, that's fewer people than your local fucking Walmart probably employs. At least that was pre-storm, right? Now, I imagine the selection process has eased up quite a bit, as things are maybe a little bit tough for the Foundation right now. But that's gonna be it. When I was going through this, I ran into a few discrepancies after writing everything up, and while I didn't want to scrap everything, I also didn't want to just leave things unsaid. It doesn't really sit well with me to purposefully omit information, so I'm just going to go ahead and mention it here at the end, right? Miss Mason, or Hannah Gayer, has a discrepancy in her bio versus her ID number, right? The implication of her date sequence is that she signed up in 1919. However, if we look at her bio, we actually see that she immigrated to the United States in 1919, and she only signed up for the Foundation a year later. By all rights, that year sequence should read 1920. So, I mean, there you go. It's kind of unfortunate, but it is what it is. I don't really think it kills the theory. There's plenty of other evidence, enough that I am comfortable in making the statement that it is indeed entry date, though I am unhappy that this particular bit doesn't actually line up. Additionally, it's not really a conflict, more just a dead theory that I wound up having to scrap. Greta and Marcus being listed as SF27600 and Mason being SF27602 initially made me believe that the 276 was the designated, quote-unquote area code for Europe, and that the trailing 2 digits were specifying which branch. However, we now know that Mason is an American-based operative in Washington, D.C., so that doesn't exactly work. Mason has been kind of an issue for me, I won't lie. But maybe she's just special forces and all her data is falsified anyways, who knows, imagine that. That's it, yeah. Full disclosure, this one is definitely a filler video. The actual video I have been working on for God knows how long now is currently kicking my ass. I've been stuck on it for a bit, so I opted to just kind of have a palate cleanse and decided to work on something else. This entire thing got done last night because of that Twitter thread, link in the description below. The other video is nearly done. I'm just having a whole heap of skill issues in actually getting it there. I did feel bad about not uploading something in a while, so this is just here to tide y'all over till then. Thank you to Ayn Rand, Paul Ryan, Day, and Mikoyan for supporting me on Patreon. It really does mean a ton. And for the rest of you, I hope this was enough for the time being, and I will see you on the next one. Hopefully, that'll be soon. Alright, bye-bye.